This is The Weekly on ClickOrlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Good morning, I'm Justin Warmoth. In the wake of the recent mass shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde and Tulsa, there's a renewed debate about gun control in America. I had a chance to sit down with Pulse nightclub survivor Brandon Wolf this week, who's been pushing for gun reform ever since June 12th, 2016. And Brandon, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I was trying to figure out how to sort of start this, but I think we just have to start with this, and that is when you saw what happened in Uvalde, what kind of emotions run through you as someone who has survived a mass shooting in this country?
Well, the first thing I feel is heartbreak for the families who are going to go through hell for the rest of their lives. For the people who survived, I'm thinking of the children who talk about playing dead and smearing the blood of their friends on their faces so they don't become the next target. They will never be the same. Their lives will be changed forever. And I also felt rage, and I still feel rage today because these people are paying the price for this nation's inaction on gun violence. We've been gaslit for a long time, saying, well, it's not really the crisis you think it is, or, well, it's not really the guns, it's something else. But they're asking us to not believe what's right in front of our own eyes. We can see it. In 2020, gun-related injuries became the #1 cause of death for American children and teens. That is a statistic. I mean, it is a fact, and it's something that's right in front of our noses. And so when I say I feel rage, it's because we have done nothing in the past decades to keep kids safe in this country. We have been so laser focused on all these other things. We've been held hostage by right-wing politicians who've told us that the greatest threats our children face are that they might find out that this country was built on the backs of enslaved black people, or that they might have a teacher who uses they-them pronouns, and we've got to stop the world, change policies, impact everyone to try to protect them from those things. When at the end of the day, the thing that is actually killing them is gun violence, and our leaders have done absolutely nothing, substantial to make it better for kids.
Republican leaders have said that, and blamed, really, Democrats, the media, and whoever, for politicizing a mass shooting instead of letting these families grieve and trying to focus more on that. In fact, Texas Senator Ted Cruz basically said that we're trying to restrict the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. When you hear that argument of it, how do you feel?
Well, I think I feel the same way the rest of the country feels. Tired of it. We're so tired of listening to the same rhetoric from empty suits in Washington, D.C. who don't want to do their jobs. At the end of the day, that's it. In any other country, if 19 children were gunned down, these are our fourth graders, by the way, so you have to picture what happened that day. The 19 families sent their 10-year-old children to school. Maybe they tucked in the sheets on their bed after that. Maybe they put some of their clothes in the washing machine after that. Maybe they then set out a plate for their after-school snack. And then those 19 families got the worst possible news, that their children would be coming home in body bags. I don't find it political for this country to say, that's unacceptable. We need to figure out what we can do to protect kids. I don't find it political to say, we need to come together, regardless of what we believe, and find a solution to the gun violence epidemic that is killing our children. That is not political to me. What is political is continuing to double down on the status quo and tell a traumatized country that nothing can be done or that nothing would work to keep their children safe. It is political for people like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Rick Scott to continue to choose the gun lobby and gun manufacturers over the lives of their own constituents. For me, it is political for these politicians to choose time and time again their career ambitions over the well-being and physical safety of the people who elected them.
Mm-hmm. We've also heard that it's a mental health issue. This is, and then to harden schools. That's the answer to this. But this isn't just happening in schools.
Right.
And the schools have been hardened.
Yeah.
The mental health part of this, I'm sure that is a factor.
Well, but
Obviously.
it's rooted in hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is the strategy for the Republican Party. And again, I think people in this country are tired of it. If you think mental health is a crisis, which I do, I think our system of structures for people suffering from mental health crises is woefully insufficient. But if you believe that mental health is at the core of the gun violence epidemic, then why would you not be doing everything in your power to funnel more resources to solve the mental health crisis? If you are saying that the reason this happens only in America, not anywhere else in the industrialized world, is because we have a unique crisis with mental health, then why would you not be putting real dollars and resources into solving that mental health crisis? But instead, those politicians who hide behind those talking points are the first ones to slash budgets. They're the first one. Rick Scott is the first one to reject free dollars from the federal government to expand Medicaid, to be able to take care of people, their health. So the hypocrisy at the center of the strategy is about deflecting long enough to wait out the cycle. It's about miring us in debating whether or not it's too soon to talk about it, and then miring us in a debate about whether or not it's mental health or the guns. And then by the time we've finished those conversations and coalescing around a solution, they've already waited out the news cycle, the headlines have moved on to something else, and they're not being held accountable for their refusal to act.
In 2018, when Florida passed some gun control legislation, including red flag laws, that was not easy, obviously, in light of what happened at Parkland. You would think that it would be something that would be a no-brainer, but it took a lot.
They did.
What did it take to get to that point right there, and should it go even further?
Well, it took passionate, powerful people who've been directly impacted. I was in some of those rooms with lawmakers, and I was there on the steps of the Capitol when we rallied with 20,000 people for those common sense gun safety measures. But I think what moved lawmakers most was the stories of parents who lost their children, because in the students at Parkland, they could see their own children. And they, maybe for the first time, imagined a world where they sent their own kids to school and their kids didn't come home. And that was moving enough. All of the rest of the stars aligned. The legislature was in session at the time, which is tricky in the state of Florida. There were people who were on the ballot, including then Governor Rick Scott, who wanted to run for the U.S. Senate. And they made a calculation in that moment that it would be better for them to do something than to be held accountable for doing nothing. And they were motivated, again, by students and parents who had lost their children. But at the end of the day, it was still their own political ambition that allowed them to get over the finish line. And I've said all along that our strategy to approaching this has to be, for once, to make these politicians feel that they will be accountable for doing nothing. They're constantly making calculations about how to preserve their own career ambitions at the same time that they, dangle carrots in front of us to placate the things that we want to see done. We have to make them feel political pressure and ultimately political accountability for doing nothing. They actually have to lose their jobs if they choose to do nothing. And you asked me if it went far enough in 2018. It didn't. We have a lot more work to do, but I'll give you an example of something that has worked in the state of Florida since then. The red flag law that Governor Rick Scott signed into law has been used almost 6,000 times in the last 4 years. Almost 6,000 times. Someone has had their firearms temporarily removed because a court found them to be an immediate threat to themselves or someone else. That is a gun law in action. That saved lives.
Now, gun control advocates, including Wolf, have also been pushing for a ban on assault weapons, which are used so often in mass shootings. We'll have that part of the discussion and whether he believes it's actually realistic right after this. Stay with us.
This is The Weekly on clickorlando.com with Justin Warmoth.
Welcome back. There have been more than 230 mass shootings in the U.S. this year, and we haven't even reached the halfway point. Hospitals, grocery stores, schools, all targeted, and it's reigniting the push for lawmakers to pass gun control legislation. President Biden calling for a number of measures to curb the violence, including a ban on assault weapons, something Pulse nightclub survivor Brandon Wolf has been fighting for over the last 6 years. What is the ideal gun control legislation for you? What do you believe should happen in this country?
Well, there are a lot of things I'd like to see happen. I'm a data person, so I want to know what works. You tell me the data. If it saves lives, I think we should be doing that. And the data is pretty clear on this. There is another misconception that we don't know what will solve it, or that gun safety laws don't work. That is fundamentally false. There have been plenty of independent studies done, and they show this, that states that pass a suite of legislation designed to keep dangerous people from getting their hands on deadly weapons save lives. That states that have enacted things like red flag laws and universal background checks and safe storage laws, states that have enacted those policies have seen their homicide rates decrease anywhere from 25 to 35%. So the data tells us that if we do our due diligence to try to protect the rights of gun owners, and at the same time make sure that people we know to be dangerous don't get their hands on weapons, that we can actually save lives in this country. And by the way, that's not just mass violence. That is the daily gun violence that kills anywhere between 100 and 150 people a day in this country. So that's what I'd like to see done. I'd like to see us start with where the data tells us to start. If we pass a suite of legislation in this country aimed at making sure dangerous people don't get their hands on guns, we will save lives tomorrow.
The governor has said, Governor DeSantis, before he leaves office, he would like to sign into law for Floridians to be able to carry, constitutional carry. Is that going backwards?
The governor's obsession with appeasing his right-wing base is making Florida a less safe place for all of us. Permitless carry is not going to solve any of the problems that we're facing with gun violence. We've been told for a long time that more guns are the answer. That if there was just a good guy with a gun, that they could stop the bad guy with a gun. Never mind that there were 19 good guys with guns standing in a hallway in Texas waiting for someone to tell them to open the door. But if there was just a 20th good guy, maybe then all of it would have been solved. We have been trying that experiment on our children for a really long time, and it's not working. The fact of the matter is this: we have more guns per capita in this country than any other country on the planet, and it's not even close. So if more guns were going to make us safer, if easier access to firearms was going to make us safer in this country, we would have the lowest violent crime rate on earth. And we don't. It simply does not make us safer to put guns on every street corner, to have somebody buying an assault rifle one aisle over from the produce. That doesn't make us safer in this country. And quite frankly, Governor DeSantis doesn't care. For him, it's not about public safety. It's not about the physical or mental health outcomes for his constituents. It's about winning races and being president of the United States. Ever since he got a whiff of his own supply, he got this idea in the back of his head, or somebody whispered to him that he could be president someday. He has screeched hard right. He has pulled our state politics down into the extremist gutter. And this is just another one of those things, an insult to injury, and an especially insult to injury in this moment as we face horrible mass shootings across the country, including the one in Texas.
AR-15s are used in a number of these mass shootings, and I think it points to the power of these weapons when the police officers, the law enforcement in Uvalde, retreated and did not enter because the gunman had an AR-15.
That's right.
And they could not keep up with the power that that gun has. Should that be able to be purchased legally in this country?
I don't believe so. I think that we need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country. And I know that that's controversial for people. My own parents own AR-15 style weapons, and that is a controversial topic for us over Thanksgiving dinner. But the fact of the matter is, in our society today, those weapons are causing incredible damage. They are shattering communities. They are ripping worlds apart. It happened here in Orlando. The weapon used at Pulse was a Sig Sauer MCX, which has been called the next generation AR-15. These weapons are incredibly dangerous, and they are designed to kill as many people as quickly as possible. I don't think they belong on our streets. I certainly don't think they belong in a place where someone can stroll in and walk out with one 5 minutes later. We've done some work around that in Florida, changing some of the laws around waiting periods and the age of purchase. I think, and I support a full ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And I know that there are a number of people in this country that do. Those things are popular. They're broadly popular.
Is it doable, though? Is that actionable? Is that something that realistically, I mean, you would think that something like that would have been in place immediately after Sandy Hook.
Right. Well,
and then a number of shootings have happened since then,
Yeah.
including Pulse, including Parkland, including Buffalo a week before
Right.
Uvalde.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, what's your confidence level on that?
Well, it's not going to happen tomorrow. And I think we know the reason why. There's a fascinating book that I read called The Gunning of America by Pamela Haig, I think is her last name. And she talks about the origins of America's obsession with firearm ownership. And most people have this idea of the wild, wild west where, a gun was sort of intrinsically linked with our American identity, and to own one makes you a patriot and a real man. And that's actually a fabrication and a creation of marketing. At post-World War I, gun manufacturers created a new marketing scheme to be able to sell this glut of firearms that they had created to a society that was beginning to urbanize. And people living in cities didn't see a need to have a gun in the same way that they did when they were living in the country. They saw at that time guns as practical tools, right? As tools of hunting and protecting your property. And so gun manufacturers got together and they began marketing weapons to teenage boys. And creating this idea that a gun was not simply to be used, but was something to fall in love with. That has taken root in this country. And gun manufacturers and the gun lobby have continued to use that culture of obsession with guns to double down on selling more guns to people. And they have wholly purchased Congress in the process. You've got a number of politicians, whether it's on the state level or the federal level, that are beholden to the gun manufacturers and the gun lobby because their entire reelection campaigns rely on dollars from those industries. And so when it comes down to it, who are they going to choose? Are they going to choose the 19 children waiting to be saved in a classroom in Uvalde, or are they going to choose their reelection bid? And as we've seen, they're going to choose their reelection bid every single time. That thing that's being held over their heads by gun manufacturers and the gun lobby. So that's what's preventing us from getting something like an assault weapons ban over the finish line tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But I really do sincerely hope and believe that this movement that's building on the ground level is going to change something. Think about the 2020 election cycle for a moment. President Biden ran openly on wanting to ban assault weapons. Mm-hmm. He ran openly on wanting red flag laws nationally, on wanting to talk about the age of purchase. He ran openly on probably the most progressive gun safety platform that we've seen in decades. He was only able to do that because there is a groundswell of support for gun safety measures in this country that is resisting the kind of political gridlock that's happening in Washington, D.C. In 2016, Hillary Clinton was not able to run on that kind of a platform. She was told that if she talked about guns in that way, she would lose. And in 2020, President Biden was able to bring that into the political zeitgeist because of the groundswell that we have created. I'm hopeful that that groundswell leads to policy change.
Now, we're just a week away from marking 6 years since a gunman took 49 lives at Pulse nightclub. On next Sunday's episode, Wolf will reflect on the tragedy, the challenges he and other survivors have dealt with, and the emotions he feels when another mass shooting happens in our country. We hope to see you then. I'm Justin Warmoth. Hope you have a great Sunday.